Okay, so we're back, and let's get started with working on some of these other elements, and maybe combining a few of these as well. I'm going to bring this dirty layer, the textured that I started here, this one, and merge it down real quick. So that gives me my cabin on one layer, and then my trees and everything else separated still. Alright, so for the trees and this grassy area, I'm going to work on those real quick and see if we can get some stuff done with them. So I'm going to go back to Stencils and grab trees on this one. Alright. I really wish the Windows key was not between the Alt and Control button. I hit it all the time. Alright, so remember, Shift and Control lets you squish and pull the stencil as needed. So to the left stretches vertical, and to the right stretches horizontal. Okay, so we've got kind of a base layer there. We know our light's going to come from that side, so what I want to do is I'm going to actually change this. So I think you got to put these branches in. I don't like the idea of those. So we've got a darker bluish gray here. I'm going to go to the oil brush, Everlasting Oil. I'm going to just start streaking in. So let's see this to be dark instead of the other way around. So let's take a look at how that's starting. If you're having issues like that kind of now, we're just smearing together, just make a new layer. Paint on that new layer. That new layer. Like so. Alt lets you turn it. So that's giving me a good base for that. Alright, so now let's go with this color, which is a little bit of a yellowish color. We're going to go a little bit lighter. Let's see how that looks. So we get this kind of smeared on here. Again, this is always kind of a push and a play. Push and pull, push and pull. where you want the highlights to be. The main thing with this is let it fade around as it goes around the tree. So like a little bit brighter here, then kind of fades, as you can see there. So, and then I'm going to take a little of this blue. Quite sure that wants some there. It's not showing it the way I want because I have the eraser selected. Now back down to that little layer. Okay, so I put that on there and kind of smeared it around to get the color I want, which is really more this color. So that we have a little bit of reflected light, which to me always adds a lot more interest. So, okay, so that kind of, one reason it does is that it separates this from this. So you get a little bit of a light next to it. Alright, so I'm going to merge this layer down. And one thing I don't like is this right up here. So if I have it on a single layer, I can erase that. Errant marks that I don't like. Okay, so that works with that. I do want one more stencil. This is a crazy old tree stencil I made, which it really is. It's kind of squat for some reason. I'm not sure why that turned out so squat. Anyway, what I want are some of these limbs. So I even have these just limbs by themselves. Oops. That gives a little bit more character to it. so. There we go. These are a little bit much in here. Take some of those out. And it helps to zoom in because when you do, you can see stuff like this when the stencil may be best or you best. Get a nice feel for it that way. Let's see kind of where everything is. So, alright, so that gives us a much nicer underpainting to these trees that we can work with. So I don't need this right now, so I'm going to remove that one. This one. And let's work on this grass a little bit. So for this grass, I'm going to put it on a different layer. And kind of start it like so. Now, there's a couple different ways to do the grass. There's a couple of grass stencils that I've made and stuff like that. And kind of like I did in the other one with the barn, we're going to start with just some smudging and smearing of colors in here to really give us more variation. And then we'll add the details on top. And that's my dog. Actually, drop down to this layer. Get it up here that I can smudge it around. A little bit of lag from my recording. There's my dog. She's decided to work at something. Alright, I'm going to switch this to eraser mode. Take some of this back now, because I don't want it quite so high. Making bushes. Look carefully at these trees, because these trees are on the same layer. And back to regular mode. just kind of scrubbing this in like you would if you were doing acrylic or oil. You would just kind of dry brush it in. Similar kind of thing. But again, you can see that's starting to give us that nice underpainting for grass, and it's already starting to set those trees and the cabin into the painting. So let's go a little bit more on the yellow side. Put a little bit of that in there as well. So, got that there. Alright, so we've got some of that in here. We've got some of the dark over here. I want to scrub in some lighter colors, so I'm going to jump up to another layer. It's still not quite showing, so let's add a little bit more yellow to it. There we go. One of the things I love about digital painting is really the layers, because I can work on this, I can jump back and work on that, I can jump up here and work on this, I can paint behind it, I can really move around, and that's one of the things that you really want to embrace, is the fact that you do have the luxury to really mess around and move around and play around with the layout of stuff. Now this is that vertical tree brush that we use back here, so I'm going to use this a little bit as well. Let me get rid of that because I made that there. I find that this one, I do want it to blend a little bit, so I'm going to bring this layer down real quick. I do find that it makes, if you just kind of overlap it, it makes some really nice looking grass in the distance. Now the only thing you have to be careful of is that it has this straight line on the bottom. So you have to be aware of that and kind of plan to overlap it. But as far as like grass in the distance, kind of grass sticking up, I think it works really, really well for scrubbing it in. You just have to be aware of it and not, you have to make sure that you're changing this rotation, changing the pressure, so that way you get varying grass, so it doesn't look like a stamp, basically is what I'm trying to say. But it just helps to organically break up some of the top of the color that we're doing. So it really starts allowing it to be kind of scrubbed in nicely and give you kind of cool look. Alright. See right there, it's got a little bit of that repetition going on, so I just go back over it. Just kind of blend it in a little bit, like so. It's just from, kind of randomly scrubbing in, adding to. Some areas. Alright, so that brings that to about a midpoint. So, think what we need to do now is kind of work our way back forward to finishing some of this stuff out. So I'm going to go back and work on this tree a little bit. I think the clouds are fine like they are. I might soften them a little bit, and I might add a little bit of detail to some of these trees here just to kind of make them, I don't know, a little light hitting in here and there, just a little interesting. So let's drop back to this layer. You can see here. I'm going to select all of it. I'm going to create a layer over top of it. I'm going to set that layer's blend mode to overlay. Okay. Then I'm going to go into my brushes, and I've got a couple different ones. I've got this bush brush that I have, and I can add in some with it. So I'm going to go to a little bit of a yellowish, orangish color. Just kind of drop in. Some highlights here. There. Now on these down here, so let me tell you something, show you something real quick. Alright, so you see how you've got the dark trees here. You got a lighter tree here. You got a lighter bush here. This lighter color that's in the darker color is painting a negative. So you're painting, basically you would be painting around those trees and stuff. But I'm painting it here to give a hint of something else that's in front of it. And so it's an interesting way to put more shapes and stuff in there and kind of give a better detail without putting a lot of detail, but it just basically it's an area of interest. And so that's kind of what I'm doing here with some of this. It's just making it a little bit lighter so you got just a little bit of a breakup in it. And at 100%, which is pretty much where this is at, you can see some, cool things going on. It's just something different to look at. All right, so let's drop to the opposite here, to the blues, and I'm going to drop that down a little bit darker. Not that dark. Actually, let me do this. Let me select this, and drop over here to these bluish purples. Go one step over. Alright, so this is interacting with the yellow that was down, the orange yellow that was down there. That's why that kind of appeared. All I'm doing is trying to, again, add some texture and variety to what we have on here. Got my tree. This is my 1-inch tree oval. And you'll hear me clicking my mouse. That's me using the mouse because I don't want the pressure variation. If I click the mouse, it's going to go with 100% color. That's what I want. I don't want to use the pen tool. And I'm darkening here for a couple of reasons. One is it's going to make this cabin pop out from the background. And the other is I'm going to end up putting some grasses down here, so I want it to kind of show. Now if you do this, don't follow just this edge. Come a little bit away from it. And I'm going to go back to this yellowish, orangish color. Break that up just a little bit. Like so. Get my bush brush again. Break those leaves up just a bit more. Like so. Okay, so that gives us a nice look to that tree without having to spend a lot of paint on, because this isn't my focus, so I don't need it to, and this isn't my focus, so I don't need a lot on here. This is my focus. I just need this to be a hint of what's in the background, an impression of what's in the background. So, deselect, go a little bit outside the zone. Now you see how that popped up there? I don't care. It's fine. It just adds interest. Some people would be like, oh my god, you gotta go back and fix it. And sometimes I will, sometimes I won't. I might still. I doubt it, but maybe. Okay. And I think this would be a little bit more interesting if we had maybe like a little bit of a mist in here, like you see in the Smoky Mountains. I'm going to add a new layer. Take some of this light bluish color. I'm just going to, it's still my same bush brush, I didn't change it. Then I'm going to go to palette knife, heavy blurred frosting, and that same circular motion. I'm just going to blend this. Now to me that's kind of cool because that adds interest of almost wanting to go over that hill and see what's going on down there. Like it could be early morning, it could be midday, it could be, a lot of things. And so it just adds an interest, and I add a little bit more of it up here as well. Push some of that back. And maybe just a little bit here too. You know what? I kind of like it that much. I kind of like it, so just that changes the whole feel of the picture. So without it, with it. To me, that's intriguing. That's neat. It makes me want, like I said, it makes me want to go look at the cabin, but then look what's going on down here. But it's not distracting enough. It's just another piece of the story that's there. So, okay. I think we can leave that. So I'm going to merge the overlay that we did down. And so I think our sky is okay like it is. I think that's okay. So let's focus on tightening up this cabin. Then we'll come back and push this grass a little more. And then we'll come back and push these trees a little more for the contrast and the look. Excuse me. And then we'll work on finishing up this right here. So let's do the cabin. Alright, so I need to put some stones up here. I'm going to have a couple of stone type brushes that I'm going to use. So first things first, let's posts. I kind of fixed some of the stuff that we were looking at here, so I'm going to bring my drawing back. Okay, I'm going to go with this selection tool, because I can get the straight edge with it. Oops. Alright, the oil brush. And this color. Vertical. That's going to give me that streakiness that I want. And just pop it a bit. So it's kind of a post. Like so. And I'm going to go back to this. I'm going to push Shift. So, why did it not? Hang on. Okay. Go back to doing this because I want to do these together. So a lot of times in these old cabins, they would just use logs. They would sometimes square them off to make more, looks like boards. Other times they would just use round logs. You can see on several of the cabins in the national parks and stuff, you can see that's what they've done. And this one is really no different as far as that goes. I've got in my custom brushes, I have a wood grain brush. So let's use a little bit of that. Just add a little bit of streakiness to it. This brush is a little intense as far as sometimes it puts a lot of pull on the system because it's repeating a pattern so much. Alright, so I'm going to do Shift-Control-I. So I have selected everything else except these. Go to my eraser. Carefully get rid of that. Alright. And then Shift-Control-I to invert again. Oops. My eraser tool still. Okay. And then Control-D. So that's starting to give me a little bit of that nice post look. See? Got some texture and stuff in that. Alright, so let's go back to here. And we're going to go to here. so. Alright, I'm actually going to take some of this out. Well, before I do, switch to E. And erase a little bit of this. Use your right and left brackets to let you slowly resize the brush. Alright, so back to here. Alt. I can deselect some of the stuff that I don't want to keep. And if there's something I got rid of that I wanted to keep, Shift. Put it back in. Alt. Take it out. There we go. So that gives me more of that board. Alright, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go back to my custom brush. And I'm going to grab a little dark color. Just start streaking across. So again, this is just kind of dry brushing in. That's part of the reason why I made this brush, because it just real subtly adds on. Honestly, it kind of is a little too subtle, to be perfectly honest. So, I do occasionally have to go back and forth between like the soft brush, smear out hard edges. Unless, of course, I want hard edges. And then back over to this brush. I can even switch a little bit to my airbrush. If I want that real gradual transition. Okay. Now this would actually be a little darker, because there's a board that overlaps here. So, and for this, I want to kind of erase out the card where we would have the overlap. So, I forgot to do that post. Let me do that post real quick. Soft brush. Smear it down. And the wood grain brush. Darker. A little lighter right here. A little bit of green. And there we go. Alright, so now I need to fix the door. So again, let's go back to here and select use the oil brush. We're going to take some of this dark color. So, switch to my soft brush again. Just kind of smear all that together. So it gives kind of a nice, interesting gradation. Back to here. Fix my selection. For whatever reason I skipped this part. Okay, this door. I'll come back into that in a second. Soft brush. Smear all this out. Add some texture. Maybe switch over to the wood grain. It's a very subtle thing with wood grain. So, back to the selection tool, because this board should come across. Soft brush again. I want this to be darker, but I don't want it to be as dark as this. So Shift Control I. Just look at the universe. I'll lay a little bit of a light against that. Control D. move them. See how that kind of gives the impression that there's a change there. Switch over to the pencil real quick. So this dark color. And just a little bit of interest. Like so. Soften it back to the pencil. Control that straight line. Grab a little bit of this light color. Not worried about keeping the straight line here. I want a little bit of that. Like so. That's giving us more of that look that I want. So a lot of this is going to just be details now. Like so. As we pull in more and more of the highlights and shadows and just selecting Alt to get some of the local color to make the boards and the logs kind of stand out a little bit. Like so. So that's what I'm going to keep doing here, is just refining this. So I think I will just do this and then speed it up, so that way you don't have to real time it with me.
Okay, so I have this sped up about 5 times the speed of what I'm doing it. This painting took a while because there's just so many details in it. So what I'm doing right now is just really adding in the shadows and getting those to where they start to look right. The stuff you saw me doing on the roof, and which I continue to do, is really kind of breaking up these wood shingles so that they just don't look so copied and pasted. And then what I'm doing right here is starting the foundation for the chimney. So you can see I just smudged it in with that soft brush, and then from there it's just taking the soft brush again and painting in just random rock shapes for the chimney, remembering that it curves around. I'm also grabbing different colors from the tiles and other parts of the painting that are right there, just to have kind of that local color still brought into it. And then I just first of all save it, and then from there what I'm doing is continuing to push the highlights and the darks to get them laid in so that it really starts building that stonework on top of that dark roughed up layer that I had underneath it. And that's really kind of the way it is. To do these, there's not a lot of magic to it. It's just paying attention that you don't want them all to be the same, that you don't want them to repeat a certain pattern, except maybe like at the top where you would have a pattern. And what I'm doing here is I took the brush and the ink brush, the ink tool, the ink pen, and put in a dark line to define the stones. Then I'm taking the soft brush, smearing it, going back and doing that again, and then I do the same with the highlights and the same with the shadows, because I want to have that soft transition that's there for it. So that's what I'm doing right here. It's just really kind of building that up and then erasing anything I don't need around the edge. And then once I've done that, I go back in and kind of fix the edges of the stones so that they don't look as cut and pasted kind of thing. So always zoom out, check your stuff, see where you're going with it and what it looks like, and make sure you know where you're at. These tiles are what took a little while to get that look. I was looking at a lot of wood shingle tiles, and there's just so much texture and so much variation that you could spend forever just about doing these. And so I didn't want to get lost in that overly. So I just, I want to keep that impression. Now, one of the things I did here was originally I was doing that with the pencil tool, but I took the ink pen tool and started using it instead. And I got a much nicer line with it by just turning off the smoothing and then using it to set where the bottom of the shingles would be kind of going across. But you can see basically what I'm doing here, adding in shadow, kind of breaking up that feel of, like I said, from where we cut and pasted and made all the tiles, because that was just really kind of our baseline to do that with. And then from there I start going in and highlighting and separating out the shingles. And this, like I said, this took a little while. I'm going 5 times the speed that you can see right now in this, and just had to keep going in, shrinking it down, making the lines and so forth, and just kind of separating it out, and then jumping around to kind of keep it random for what I want. And I did soften some of these, so I'll switch back and forth from like the palette knife to the ink tool to the custom brush and put in some different colors and just really kind of keep playing around with it. So that's what I'm doing here, is just starting to push all that. So this is going to go for a minute, so just kind of watch it and see what you can learn from it. All right, so once I started getting the roof tiles done there, I wanted to come in and add some more details over here as well. And I realized I needed to put in the actual window. So I just painted in some dark and kind of left some negative space for where my panes would be, and then just quickly drew those in with the ink brush. And kind of defined, so a little bit of a reflection there, so you could tell there is glass in the windows. And kind of played around with the boards a little bit to get that feel for it as well. And then through here again, same thing of just pushing the colors, defining the edge of these a little bit more, and using some of the darker tones to do so, and then defining these boards. And again, these boards, they're not really that straight when you look at them in real life. I realized that the edge of the tiles wasn't really defined, so that's what I'm doing there. And kind of going through and doing all that. So just kind of smearing it in with the soft brush and the ink brush as well. And then again, just put it in, soften it, work on multiple layers if you need to, so that way you don't worry about the bottom. But trying to pay attention to where the edges are, where everything is. And then I decided, okay, I've got to start working on these logs so that they get some definition. So from there, what I did was just started streaking in some black. It's really kind of a really dark blue, as you can see, and just kind of defining where the bottom of those other boards would be and how that would look. And then I did use my wood grain brush that I have to brush in some grain on these boards, and you can see how that works really well for it to do so. That brush is a little finicky. It hesitates a lot, but it works, so you just got to be patient with it. And I decided to go in and put a lot of these have kind of mortise and tenon joints on them, so I decided to put some of that in there. And then a little dark and highlight, and then move on doing the exact same thing in the front, and kind of carving it out with the selection tool and working on it, and really kind of rinse and repeat for right now. So just defining where the highlights and where the shadows are, and then smearing in the color, and keep using that. Like I said, that wood grain brush takes a lot of the effort out of it for me, so that's why I made that brush, even though it's kind of finicky. Okay, so once those were more defined, it was time to work on the porch because I'd kind of neglected it. And so I needed to go in and do some of the boards. And that's just really kind of laying down some dark underneath there and then using the control button to draw the straight lines and just kind of get those laid across. Again, not overly worried about it. Once I had that done, and this is on another layer, so I'm not messing with the one below it. And because that way I can also erase around it like you see right now, where I'm erasing back out the posts so that they are sitting on top of that wood and don't have to paint around it. And then once I had that, it was kind of defining the end pieces of the board so that you can see it. And again, you're just trying to give that impression of stuff being there. The human mind will fill in the rest. If you can just give it, 60, 70% of it, it'll fill in the rest of it. And so that's what I'm doing here, is just kind of giving that rough sketch of where it would be. And then from there, smearing on a little paint and darkness over top to set those posts on it so they're not floating above it. And again, just more shadow and more push and pull of the light. And so that's really what a lot of this comes down to. This is starting to put the frosting on the cake, if you will, and really getting that feel for stuff being in the environment and in the painting. So once I started getting that kind of where I liked it, zoomed out, took a look, saved it. And then from there, it was just, looking at my sketch to see what I needed. And I realized I'd forgotten to put the windows in, so I needed to go back and do that. Not too bad, just selection tool, use the same black from the door, smear it in, smudge in a little bit of a highlight so you can have that reflection. And then just draw in some where the window panes would be with the ink tool. And that's really what I'm doing right here. And the nice thing about doing this on another layer is I don't have to worry about affecting the one underneath it, but I can grab local color from all the wood around it so that it blends in and matches, and just like so. And then once I got that done, it was a matter of painting the frame for it. So what I did was I then selected that area around it, and this is where having the drawing comes in handy, because I already have the stuff there, so I can kind of go around. And then I just deselect the windows themselves and then smear the paint that's there. So I went back down to the actual log layer because I just was like, it'd be easier just to smear all that, and use my wood grain brush on it again, just to kind of give that hint of wood grain. And then from there, it's just a matter of carving out other details, like where the frame itself sits out, the windowsill, and all of that, and getting that look that I want for it. So that's what I'm doing right here, is getting all of that drawn in and kind of sculpted in. So, but that's kind of how you get started with all this part of it. So next is putting the texture on the trees. And again, this is still kind of the underpainting part, but I'm using another one of my stencils. I use a couple different ones, but this one is the waterfall stencil. I kind of like it for putting bark on trees. It gives a neat look to it. So that's what I'm doing with this. It's just kind of laying that on there and grabbing some of the color underneath it. And I realized I needed to have a little bit stronger look there. So what I did was I used the ink and then the soft brush to soften it. So, and kind of get that laid out how I want it. And the same with the bluish color to give the a little bit of that reflected light more, and laying in some of the shadow side of it. Now comes working on the grass. So using the pencil tool, I grab some of the lighter color and start just drawing random blades of grass, because again, you can use, there are brushes that you can use that are grass brushes in the sticker sheet or some of the presets for the custom brush. I don't like them for the most part. They're too uniform, especially the sticker spray. So I find it's easier just to take the pencil tool and the ink tool and just scratch in these all these blades of grass. And the ink works better for the close-up ones, and the pencil works better for the far off ones. And then take the palette knife and soften the bottoms of them a little bit. I did this on a separate layer, by the way, so that way I could soften the bottom and not lose anything. And if I got any of them that I didn't like, I could erase them or just undo them. So that's what I'm doing with this. This is just kind of looking around and grabbing local color, some of the shadow color to make blades of grass, some of the light color to make light grass, and then I look for areas that there's just too much clumping of solid color, and then go in and add some of that. So I went on a layer behind the cabin and started putting in some of the grass there, and I thought, what if some sticks looked out here? And so that's what I started doing with this. I was like, it doesn't look right. And then I did it again, and it's like, it still doesn't work right. And then what I realized was I was actually on, because I did these and I thought, those aren't too bad. I kind of like them. And then I erased it and went, oh, I'm on the fog layer. So I just undid it and decided not to worry about it. So, layers. It's a fun thing to keep up with. Next comes the fence posts. So I started getting everything else how I liked it. So I took the wood grain brush and started going over top of the posts to start laying in some of that grainy knotted pattern, and just really kept doing that again and again. And then from there went and started refining some of the shadows and the highlights as well. So taking the custom brush called Old Brush and using that to streak in color as well. And you can do this with just about any of the brushes, but now I'm using the oil brush. I did get a little bit of burnout from where the colors are over mixing, so you'll see a little bit of that there. But I just created another layer and then painted over top of it and left it be, so I wasn't worried about it. But again, here just pushing and pulling the highlights, pushing and pulling the shadows, and you want to leave it, depending on what your wood is made out of and what it looks like, and the posts and all that, you want to go with the texture, and it's just a matter of calling out some of the highlights and some of the dark shadows that really gives you that feel of cracked wood, of old wood, and that kind of stuff. And that's what I'm doing right here, is really just streaking in some knot work, streaking in some knots, and then streaking in some highlights and so forth to kind of give a little bit of an impression of, okay, here's a really gnarly end, here's a really rough section, and just kind of doing that across the different stages of it. So that's what I'm doing here, is just kind of streaking all that in. Okay, so started getting all this streaked in and building up some of the rough texture and really breaking up that wood to get it how I liked. And then I was like, okay, I need to add in some highlights and some shadows next and really kind of push and pull that. So what I did was created a new layer, set it to overlay, created another layer, set it to multiply. On the overlay layer, I took this orangish color and started laying in some just random spots of color that would be hitting and highlighting all these different things, like these fence posts, the edge of the tree, the roof, the grass, and all that. And so I laid it in, and once I got it laid on there, then I took the palette knife and the heavy blurred frosting and softened it from there so that it wasn't as harsh. Instead, just kind of gave me a general lightened tone. So that's kind of what I'm doing here. This bluish color, I did put a little bit of it on there as well to capture a little bit of the reflected light And then I took it and started doing the shadow layer next, but it does give you a nice reflective light, as you can see on the trees back there, and a little bit on the cabin as well, and some on the roof to kind of, you know, break up that color and break up the feel of it. And then took the palette knife and softened it back quite a bit, because again, I don't want it to, if it's too much of it, it will take over the painting, and so I didn't want that. And even puts a little bit more on the grass so that it would have a little bit more of that bluish green kind of feel to it. And then, like I said, I took and had the other layer with multiply. So keeping a very light blue, I was able to take that and then soften it back to kind of really push some of the shadows into that bluish realm and really kind of make those call outs on those as well. And it does a good job. You know, it really kind of gives you a little bit more interest. Not necessarily realistic, but again, I'm not going for super realism. I'm going for impressionistic / realist, just so that it has the feeling of what it is without being hyper realistic. If I wanted hyper realistic, I would just photo bash. So that's what I'm doing here. And then once I started getting all the shadows and stuff laid in, I realized that I needed to work a little bit on the details, the final details, and kind of playing around with that. I slowed this down just a little bit now for this part of it, so I could talk a little bit more about it. But this is still about 2.5 times faster than what I was painting it. So I kind of got to where I was feeling good about it, and wasn't quite done yet. I knew that there were some issues here and there that I needed to kind of do the final bit of pulling together. One thing I thought, I was like, well, what if I add some more fog in here? How does that look? Do I like that? Is it too much? Is it too little? It was too much. I decided, you know what, I don't care for it. So sometimes I'll erase it away and then fuzz it up a little bit more, but then I was like, nah, and I just ended up deleting it and getting rid of it. So a little bit more into the trees and a little bit onto the roof to kind of pull your eye towards there, and on the cabin, give that golden look to it. And then zooming out to see how I like it. So one of the things I didn't like at this point, and realized I really needed to work on, are these trees. They were still a little fuzzy on the edges, so it looked a little odd to me, and I thought it needed a little bit more refinement. So one thing I was doing was trying to sharpen the edges with the pen tool and kind of get a feel for it and see how that looks and how I like it. Kind of got there, but then I realized, you know what, I really want to just add some very distinct bark patterns to it. So I took another one of the stencils and then laid that over top of it, stretched it, and this is just an abstract shape that I laid over it. But by then taking the oil brush and laying in some of the strict stuff with it, it looked like a tree that had bark on it, or had bark that had peeled off, like maybe a birch tree or something like that, and just kind of started giving me that look that I wanted. And I realized, okay, yeah, this is what I need to kind of define that tree, because it's closer, so it should have more definition to it. And I think that's what the problem was. I just didn't have that definition that I needed. So I'm using the custom brush. I was actually using the particles because I liked the way it looked kind of broken up on it. And so it's just a matter of moving the stencil around. It's one of the things I like about the stencils. You can resize them, stretch them, move them around, and then you can really get a lot of mileage out of just a couple stencils of playing with it. So decided to add some shadow, reflective shadow color to it as well. So that's what I'm doing here. And kind of playing around with that and getting a feel for it and breaking up some of those shapes so that it has, again, just sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's in your face, but I just wanted it to be, to have that better feel to it. So I got that done and was looking at it and kind of trying to figure out, okay, what's the next step that I need? And there was a couple things I realized. One, I wanted to add a little bit more texture to these posts, so I decided to do that. And again, using that exact same bark one, I just stretched it out and then took it and started adding in some highlights and adding in some shadows with it as well. So I did that, and then after doing that, that made me realize, okay, there's a little bit other stuff that's missing in the foreground, and so then I decided to go ahead and start adjusting some of that and playing with it. So you'll see that here in just a second, where I start kind of messing around with the foreground. And because I realized, you know, there's a lot of green there's a lot of yellow, but it's a really big space, and it's kind of a dead space as far as something interesting to look at. And again, there goes that Windows button. So once I got it to where I kind of liked it, this is where I was kind of sitting back and looking at it thinking, you know what, I need to break up some of the space. I want to add some more grass in the front, so these fence posts are kind of sitting in the same grass that they're in front of for the other part of the painting. So I did that and started adding some of that in and really kind of pushing it. I think that really set them into the painting. Otherwise they kind of felt like they were just floating there, and gave it a real good feel. And then one of the other things that I realized was that, you know, I need some wild flowers in there. That just adds some interest. So I just took the snow particles brush from the custom brush presets and started putting in some random spots of flowers. If I was doing this traditionally, I would just take a toothbrush and start flicking paint on it. But then I took some of the same stuff, the reds and blues, and kind of put those in there. And to me, that really kind of helps give it that little bit. Now what I did here was I selected the layer because I wanted to change some of the dots. You know, darken some so they look like they're in the shadow, erase them a little bit so they kind of fade back, and really just kind of play around with the pushing and pulling so it doesn't look like it's just all the exact same thing splattered over top of it. And then by selecting the layer, that really gave me the ability to do that without having to worry about all the other stuff. Then once I did that, I like to draw just a hint of a few stems on some of them so they don't look like they're just floating in space. Don't have to do that, but for me, I like it. It just gives it a little bit that extra something. So that's what I'm doing right here, is just kind of going through and drawing some of those stems, and then I'll go back with the palette knife and soften the bottom part of it as well. So that way it looks, kind of disappears into the grass. So again, this is just the frosting on the cake. It's kind of pulling it all together. You know, you want to look for those little things where you can kind of make those adjustments and those tweaks and give that little extra bit. And that's really what I was doing here, and kind of finishing it out. And so this is kind of coming up on the end of it anyway. But I hope you got something out of this, and you guys have enjoyed this lesson. This was about 5 hours of painting to bring you this lesson, plus the recording it, editing it, and everything else. So honestly, probably about 7 hours in this thing, 7 or 8 hours. Wanted to put the path in because I realized I needed to do that from the original drawing. So I'm just kind of roughing it in real quick, and then taking and erasing some of it back, and then throwing some more grass over top of it so it really seats it into the painting as well. So you can see that's what I'm doing right here. And I think it does a good job with doing that as well. So anyway, I hope you guys have enjoyed this. I can't thank you enough for being patrons, and I just want to keep bringing you guys quality stuff that is helpful. So if there's something that you think that you need help with or something like that, just let me know and I'll work with it as well. So until the next one.